Welcome back to another reading stream. Tonight is finally the night we finish off the book Psycho by Robert Bloch. I did watch the movie beforehand, so I did kind of break the rule a little bit. But if you want to see my movie reaction to Psycho, it is up for anybody to watch if they want to watch that after watching the read alongs here. But we are finally finishing off the book Psycho. And I gotta say, even though I know how the movie ends and it's very much going to be like the book, at the very end of the day, I have enjoyed reading this book because there are a few differences between the book and the movie. Um, you know that that are very well to make it like kind of like its own experience, even when there are certain things about the book, that are better than the movie, and there are certain things about the movie that make it better than the book. But whatever. Either way, I'll go ahead and finish off the last four chapters, and no matter how long it takes, I will not end the stream until we finish the book. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, if you are watching this live or in the VOD, be sure to sit back, relax, and enjoy the reading. Or, or if you are using this to take a nap in some way, I hope you enjoy your nap as well as the reading. Either way, without further ado, for the final time with Psycho, let's begin. Chapter 14. For a moment, Sam hoped that the sudden thunder would muffle the sound of the car starting in the driveway. Then he noticed that Bates was standing at the end of the counter. From that position, he could see the entire driveway and a quarter of a mile up the road, so there was no sense trying to ignore Leland's departure. Mind if I come in for a few minutes? Sam asked. Wife's taking a little ride into town. She's fresh out of cigarettes. Used to have a machine here, Bates answered, but there wasn't enough pull for them, so they yanked it out. He peered over Sam's shoulder, gazing off into the dust, and Sam knew he was watching the car move onto the highway. Too bad she has to go all that way. Looks as if it's going to be raining pretty hard in a few minutes. Get much rain around here? Sam sat down in the arms of a padded sofa. Quite a bit, Bates nodded vaguely. We get all kinds of things around here. What did he mean by that remark? Sam peered up at him in the dim light. The eyes behind the fat man's glasses seemed vacant. Suddenly, Sam caught the telltale whiff of alcohol, and at the same moment he noticed the bottle, standing at the edge of the counter. That was the answer. Bates was a little bit drunk, just enough to immobilize his expression, but not enough to affect his awareness. He caught Sam looking at the whiskey bottle. Care for a drink? He asked. He was asking. Just about to pour a little one for myself when you came in. Sam hesitated. Well, find you a glass. There's one under here someplace. He bent up behind the counter, emerged holding a shot glass. Don't generally bother with them myself. Don't generally take a drink when I'm on duty either. But with the dam coming on, a little something helps. Particularly if you have re- re- rheumatism the way I do. He filled the shot glass, pushed it forward on the counter. Sam rose and walked over to it. Besides, there won't be any more customers coming along in this rain. Look at it come down. Sam turned. It was raining hard now. He couldn't see more than a few feet up the road in the downpour. It was getting quite dark too, but Bates made no movement to switch on any lights. Go ahead, take your drink and sit down, Bates said. Don't worry about me. I like to stand here. Sam returned to the sofa. He glanced at his watch. Layla had been gone about 8 minutes now. Even in this rain, she'd get to Firevale in less than 20, then 10 minutes to find the sheriff, or say 15 to just be on the safe side. 20 minutes more to return. Still, it wouldn't be better than 3/4 of an hour. It would be better than 3/4 of an hour. That was a long time to stall. What could he talk about? Sam lifted his glass. Bates was taking a swig out of the bottle. He made a gulping noise. Must be pretty lonesome out here sometimes, Sam said. That's right. The bottle thumped down on the counter. Pretty lonesome. But interesting too in a way, I suppose. I'll bet you get to see all kinds of people in a spot like this. They come and go. I don't pay much attention. After a while you hardly notice. Been here a long time? Over 20 years running the motel. I've always been lived here, all my life. And you run the whole place by yourself? That's right. Bates moved around the counter, carrying the bottle. Here, let me fill your glass. I really shouldn't. Won't hurt you. I'm not going to tell your wife. Bates chuckled. Besides, I don't like to drink alone. He poured, then retreated behind the counter. Sam sat back. The man's face was only a gray blur in the growing darkness. The thunder sounded overhead again, but there was no lightning, and here inside everything seemed quiet and peaceful. Looking at this man, listening to him, Sam was beginning to feel slightly ashamed. He sounded so damned ordinary. It was hard to imagine him being mixed up in something like this. And just what was he mixed up in anyway, if he was mixed up? Sam didn't know. Mary had stolen some money. Mary had been here overnight. She had lost an earring in the shower, but she could have banged her head. She could have cut her ear when the earring came off. Yes, and she could have gone on to Chicago too, just the way Arbogast and the sheriff seemed to think. He really didn't know very much about Mary when he came right down to it. In a way, her sister seemed more familiar. A nice girl, but too hair-triggered, too impulsive, always making snap judgments and decisions. Like this business of wanting to run straight up and search Bates's house. Good thing he'd talk her out of that one. Let her bring the sheriff. Maybe even that was a mistake. The way Bates was acting now, he didn't seem like a man who had anything on his conscience. Sam remembered that he was supposed to be talking. It wouldn't do to just sit there. You were right, he murmured. It is raining pretty hard. I like the sound of the rain, Bates said. I like the way it comes down hard. It's exciting. Never thought of it in that way. Guess you could use a little excitement around here. I don't know. We've had our share. We? I thought you said you lived here alone. I said I operated the motel alone, but it belongs to both of us, my mother and me. Sam almost choked on the whiskey. He lowered the glass, clenching it tightly in his fist. I didn't know. Of course not. How could you? Nobody does. That's because she always stays in the house. She has to stay there. You see, most people think she's dead. The voice was calm. Sam couldn't see Bates's face in the dimness now, but he knew it was calm too. Actually, there is excitement around here after all. Like there was 20 years ago when Mother and Uncle Joe Considine drank the poison. I called the sheriff and he came out and found them. Mother left a note, explaining everything. Then they had an inquest, but I didn't go to it. I was sick, very sick. They took me to the hospital. I was in the hospital a long time, almost too long to do any good when I got out, but I managed. Managed? Bates didn't reply, but Sam heard the gurgle, and then the bottle thumped. Here, Bates said, let me pour you another. Not yet. I insist. He was coming around the counter now, and his shadowy bulk loomed over Sam. He reached for Sam's glass. Sam drew back. First tell me the rest, he said quickly. Bates halted. Oh, yes. I brought Mother back home with me. Now, that was the exciting part, you see, going out to the cemetery at night and digging up the grave. She'd been shut up in that coffin for such a long time that at first I thought she really was dead. But she wasn't, of course. She couldn't be. Or else she wouldn't have been able to communicate with me when I was in the hospital all that while. It was only a trance state, really, what we call suspended animation. I knew how to revive her. There are ways, you know, even if some folks call it magic. Magic, that's just a label, you know, completely meaningless. It wasn't so very long ago that people were saying that electricity was magic. Actually, it's a force which can be harnessed if you know the secret. Life is a force too, a vital force. And like electricity, you can turn it off and on, off and on. I'd turn it off, and I knew how to turn it on again. Do you understand me? Yes, it's very interesting. I thought you might be interested. You and the young lady. She isn't really a wife, is she? Why, you see, I know more than you think I know, and more than you know yourself. Mr. Bates, are you quite sure you're alright? I mean, I know what you mean. You think I'm drunk, don't you? But I wasn't drunk when you came here. But I wasn't drunk when you found that earring and told the young lady to go to the sheriff. I sit still now. Don't be alarmed. I'm not alarmed, am I? And I would be if anything was wrong. But nothing is wrong. You don't think I'd tell you all this if there was anything wrong, do you? The fat man paused. No, I waited until I saw her drive up the road. I waited until I saw her stop. Stop? Sam tried to find the face in the darkness, but all he could hear was the voice. Yes. You didn't know that she stopped the car, did you? You thought she went on to get the sheriff, the way you told her. But she has a mind of her own. Remember what she wanted to do? She wanted to take a look at the house. And that's what she did do. That's where she is now. Let me out of here. Of course. I'm not hindering you. It's just that I thought you might like another drink while I told you the rest about Mother. The reason I thought you might like to know is because of the girl. She'll be meeting Mother now. Get out of my way! Sam rose swiftly, and the blurred bolt fell back. You don't want another drink then? Bates' voice sounded petulantly over his shoulder. Very well. Have it your own way. The end of his sentence was lost in the thunder, and the thunder was lost in the darkness as Sam felt the bottle explode against the roof of his skull. Then voice, thunder, explosion, and Sam himself all disappeared into the night. And it was still night, but somebody was shaking him up out of the night and into his room where the light burned, hurting his eyes and making him blink. But Sam could feel now, and somebody's arms were around him, lifting him up, so that at first he felt as if his head would drop off. Then it was only throbbing, throbbing, and he could open his eyes and look at Sheriff Chambers. Sam was sitting on the floor next to the sofa, and Chambers was gazing down at him. Sam opened his mouth. Thank God, he said. He was lying about Lila then. She did it to you. The sheriff didn't seem to be listening. Got a call from the hotel about half an hour ago. They were trying to locate your friend Arbogast. Seems he checked out, but he never took his bags with him. Left him downstairs Saturday morning and he'd be back, but he never showed. Thought of thinking it over and then I tried to find you. Had a hunch you might have come out here on your own. Lucky I followed through. Then Lila didn't notify you? Sam tried to stand up. His head was splitting. Take it easy there. Sheriff Chambers pushed him back. No, I haven't seen her at all. Wait. But this time, Sam managed to make it. He stood on his feet swaying. What happened here? The sheriff muttered. Where's Bates? He must have gone up to the house after he slugged me, Sam told him. They're up there now, he and his mother. But she's dead. No, she isn't, Sam murmured. She's alive. The two of them are up at the house with Lilla. Come on. The big man plowed out in the rain. Sam followed him, scrambling along the slippery walk, panting as they began the ascent of the steep slopes leading to the house beyond. Are you sure? Chambers called over his shoulder. Everything's dark up there. I'm sure, Sam wheezed, but he might have saved his breath. The thunder came suddenly and sharply, and the other sound was fainter and much more shrill. Yet both of them heard it, somehow, and both of them recognized it. Lilla was screaming. Chapter 15. Lilla went up the steps, reaching the porch just before the rain came. The house was old, its frame sided gray and ugly here in the half light of the coming storm. Porch boards creaked under her feet, and she could hear the wind rattling the casements of the upstairs windows. She rapped on the front door angrily, not expecting any answer from within. She didn't expect anyone to do anything anymore. The truth was that nobody else really cared. They didn't care about Mary at all. Not a one of them. Mr. Lowry just wanted his money back, and Arbogast was only doing the job, trying to find it for him. As for the sheriff, all he was interested in was avoiding trouble. But it was Sam's reaction that really upset her. Lilla knocked again, and the house groaned a hollow echo. The sound of the rain drowned it out, and she didn't bother to listen closely. All right, she was angry, she admitted it. And why shouldn't she be? A whole week of listening to take it easy, be calm, relax, just be patient. If they had their way, she'd still be back there in Fort Worth. She wouldn't have ever come up here. But at least she'd counted on Sam to help her. She might have known better. Oh, he seemed nice enough, even attractive in a way, but he had that slow, cautious, conservative small town outlook. He and the sheriff made a good pair. Don't take any chances. That was their whole idea. Well, it wasn't here. Well, it wasn't hers. Not after she'd found the earring. How could Sam shrug it off and tell her to go get the sheriff again? Why didn't he just grab Bates and beat the truth out of him? That's what she would have done if she were a man. One thing was certain. She was through depending on others. Others who didn't care. Who just wanted to keep out of trouble. She didn't trust Sam to stick his neck out anymore. And she certainly didn't trust the sheriff. If she had gotten so angry, she wouldn't be doing this. But she was sick of their caution, sick of their theories. There are times when you must stop analyzing and depend on your emotions. It was sheer emotion, frustration to be exact, which prompted her to keep on with the hopeless task of rummaging around until she found Mary's earring. And there'd be something else here in that house. There had to be. She wasn't going to be foolish about this. She'd keep her head, but she was going to see for herself. That would Then it would be time enough to let Sam and the sheriff take over. Just thinking about their smugness made her rattle the doorknob. That wouldn't do any good. There was nobody inside the house to answer her. She already knew that. And she wanted in. That was the problem. Lilith dipped into her purse. All those tired old gags about how a woman's purse contains everything. The kind of gags that hicks like Sam and the sheriff would appreciate. Nail file? No, that wouldn't do. But somewhere or other, she remembered, she'd picked up a skeleton key. It might be in the coin compartment, which she never used. Yes, here it was. Skeleton key. Why did they have to call it that? Never mind, she wasn't going to worry about the problems in the philology now. The only problem was whether this key would work. She inserted it in the lock and turned it part way. The lock resisted, and she reversed the motion. The key almost fitted, but there was something. Then anger came to her aid. She twisted the key sharply. It snapped at the handle with a brittle click, but the lock gave. She turned the doorknob, felt the door move away from her hand. It was open. Lila stood in the hall. It was darker inside the house than out there on the porch. But there must be a light switch somewhere along the wall here. She found it, snapped it on. The unshaded overhead bulb gave off a feeble, sickly glare against the background of peeling, shredded wallpaper. What was the design? Bunches of grapes, or were they violets? Hideous, like something out of the last century. A glance into the parlor confirmed the observation. Lila didn't bother to go in. The rooms on this floor could wait until later. Arbogast had said he saw someone looking out of a window upstairs. That would be the place to begin. There was no light switch for the stairway. Lila went up slowly, groping along the banister. As she reached the landing, the thunder came. The whole house seemed to shake with it. Lila gave an involuntary shudder, then relaxed. It was involuntary, she told herself. Perfectly natural. Certainly there was nothing about an empty house like this to frighten anybody. And now she could turn on the light here in the upstairs hall. It had been papered in green stripes, and if that didn't frighten her, then nothing could. Ghastly! She had her choice of 3 doors to enter here. The first led to the bathroom. Lila had never seen such a place except in a museum. No, she corrected herself. They don't have bathroom exhibits in museums, but they should have had this one. An upright bathtub on legs, open pipes under the washstand and toilet seat, and dangling from the high ceiling next to the toilet, a metal pull chain. There was a small mirror, flawed and flecked, over the wash bowl, but no medicine cabinet behind it. Here was the linen closet, stacked with towels and bedding. She rummaged through the shelves hastily. Their contents told her nothing except that Bates probably had his laundry sent out. The sheets were perfectly ironed, neatly folded. Lila chose the second door, switched on the light. Another weak and naked overhead bulb, but its illumination was sufficient to reveal the room for what it was. Bates's bedroom, similarly small, similarly cramped, with a low cot more suitable for a little boy than a grown man. Probably he'd always slept here, ever since he was a child. The bed itself was rumpled and showed signs of recent occupancy. There was a bureau over in the corner, next to the closet, one of those antique horrors with a dark oak finish and corroded drawer pulls. She had no compunctions about searching the drawers. The top one contained neckties and handkerchiefs, most of them soiled. The neckties were wide and old-fashioned. She found a tie clasp in a box from which it had apparently never been removed, and 2 sets of cufflinks. The second drawer contained shirts. The third held socks and underwear. The bottom drawer was filled with white, shapeless garments which she finally, and almost incredulously, identified as nightgowns. Maybe he wore a bed cap too. Really, this whole house belonged in a museum. It was odd that there were no personal mementos, though. No papers, no photographs. But then, perhaps he took them down at the motel, in the desk then, there. Yes, that was very likely. Excuse me. Lila turned her attention to the pictures on the walls. There were two of them. The first showed a small boy sitting on a pony, and the second showed the same child standing in front of a rural schoolhouse with five other children, all girls. It took Lila several moments before she identified the youngster as Norman Bates. He had quite thin hair. He had been quite thin as a child. Nothing remained now except the closet and the two large bookshelves in the corner. She disposed of the closet quickly. It contained two suits on hangers, a jacket, an overcoat, a pair of sewed and paint-spotted trousers. There was nothing in any of the pockets of these garments. Two pairs of shoes and a pair of bedroom slippers on the floor completed the inventory. The bookshelves now. Here Lila found herself pausing, puzzling, then peering in perplexity at the incongruous contents of Norman Bates' library. A new model for of the universe, the existence of consciousness, the witch cult in Western Europe, dimension and being. These were not the books of a small boy, and they were equally out of place in the home of a rural motel proprietor. She scanned the shelves rapidly. Abnormal psychology, occultism, theosophy, translations of La Basse Justine, and here on the bottom shelf a model, a mode, a, a nondescript assortment of untitled volumes, poorly bound. Lila pulled one out at random and opened it. The illustration that leaped out at her was almost uh, pathologically pornographic. She replaced the volume hastily and stood up. As she did so, the initial shock of revulsion ebbed away, giving place to a second, stronger reaction. There was something here. There must be. What she could not read in Norman Bates' dull, fat, commonplace face was all too vividly revealed here in his library. Frowning, she retreated to the hall. The rain clammed The rain clattered harshly on the roof and thunder boomed as she opened the dark, paneled door leading to the third room. For a moment she stood staring into the dimness, inhaling a musty, mingled odor of stale perfume and what? She pressed the light switch at the side of the doorway, then gasped. This was the front bedroom, no doubt of it, and the sheriff had said something about how Bates had kept it unchanged since his mother's death. But Lila wasn't quite prepared for the actuality. Lila wasn't quite prepared to step bodily into another era, and yet she found herself there, back in the world as it had been long before she was born. For the decor of this room had been outmoded many years before Bates's mother died. It was a room with such as she thought had not existed for the past 50 years. A room that belonged in a world of gilt ormolu, clocks, of Dresden figurines, satin-scented pincushions, turkey red carpet, tasseled draperies, frescoed vanity tops, and four poster beds. A room of rockers, china, cats, of-hand embroidered bedspreads, and overstuffed chairs covered with antimacassars. And it was still alive. That was what gave Lila the feeling of dislocation in space and time. Downstairs were remnants of the past ravaged by decay, and upstairs all was shabbiness and neglect. But this room was composed, consistent, coherent, a vital, functioning entity complete with unto itself. It was spotlessly clean, immaculately free of dust, and perfectly ordered. And yet, aside from the musty odor, there was no feeling of being in a short place, a show place, or a museum. The room did seem alive, as does any room that is lived in for a long time. Furnished more than 50 years ago, untenanted and untouched since the death of its occupant 20 years ago, it was still the room of a living person. A room where, just yesterday, a woman had sat and peered out the window. There are no ghosts, Lilla told herself, then frowned again at the realization that it had been necessary to make the denial. And yet, here in this room, she could feel a living presence. She turned to the closet. Coats and dresses still hanging in a neat row, though some of the garments were sagged and wrinkled through a long lack of pressing. Here were the short skirts of a quarter of a century ago. Up on the shelf the ornate hats, the headscarves, several shawls such as an older woman might wear in a rural community. At the rear of the closet was a deep, empty recess, which might have been meant for the storage of luggage, and nothing more. Lilla started over to examine the dresser and vanity, then halted beside the bed. The hand-embroidered bedspread were very lovely. She put that she put out a hand to feel the texture, then drew it back hastily. The bedspread was tucked in tightly at the bottom and hung perfectly over the sides, but the top was out of line. It had been tucked in, yes, but quickly, carelessly, so that an inch of the double pillow showed, that the way a spread is tucked in when a bed has been made in a hurry. She ripped the spread down, pulled back the curtains, pulled back the covers. The sheets were a smudgy gray and covered with little brown flecks, but the bed itself, and the pillow above it, bore the faint yet unmistakable indentation made by a recent occupant. She could almost trace the outline of the body by the way the undersheet sagged, and there was a deep depression in the center of the pillow where the brown flecks were thickest. There are no ghosts, Lilla told herself again. This room has been used. Bates didn't sleep here, his old bed offering sufficient evidence of that. But somehow had been sleeping. Somebody had been staring out of the window, and if it had been Mary, where was she now? She could ransack the rest of the room, go through the drawers, search downstairs, but that wasn't important at the moment. There was something else she had to do first. If she could only remember, where was Mary now? Then she knew. What was it Sheriff Chambers had said? That he found Norman Bates down in the woods behind the house, gathering firewood? Firewood for the furnace. Yes, that was it. The furnace in the basement. Lilla turned and fled down the stairs. The front door was open and the wind howled in. The front door was open because she'd used the skeleton key, and now she knew why that term bothered her. It was because of the skeleton, of course, and she knew why she had been so angry, too, ever since finding the earring. She had been angry because she was afraid, and the anger helped to hide the fear of what happened to Mary, what she knew had happened to Mary, down the cellar. It was because of Mary that she was afraid, not for herself. He had kept her all week. He had kept her here all week. Maybe he'd tortured her. Maybe he'd done to her what that man was doing in that filthy book. He'd tortured her until he found out about the money, and then the cellar. She had to find the cellar. Lilla groped her way along the downstairs hall, into the kitchen. She found the light and gasped at the tiny furry creature crouched on the shelf before her, ready to spring. But it was only a stuffed animal. Its button eyes are idiotically alive in the reflection of the overhead light. The basement stairs were just ahead. She fumbled at the wall until her hand brushed over another switch. The light went on below, just a faint and faltering glow in the darkened depths. Thunder growled in a counterpoint to the clatter of her heels. The bare bulb dangled from a cord directly in front of the furnace. It was a big furnace, with a heavy iron door. Lilla stood there, staring at it. She was trembling now. She admitted that to herself. She could admit everything now. She'd been a fool to come here alone. A fool to do what she had done. A fool to do what she was doing now. But she had to do it because of Mary. She had to open the furnace door and see what she knew would be inside. God, what if the fire was still going? What if... But the door was cold, and there was no heat from the furnace, no heat from within the dark, utterly empty recess behind the door. She stooped, peering, without even attempting to use the coal poker. No ashes, no smell of burning, nothing at all. Unless it had been recently cleaned, the furnace hadn't been used since last spring. Lilla turned away. She saw the old-fashioned laundry tubs and the table and chair beyond them, next to the wall. There were bottles on the table and carpentry tools, plus an assortment of knives and needles. Some of the knives were oddly curved, and several of the needles were attached to syringes. Behind them rose a clutter of wooden blocks, heavy wire, and large shapeless blobs of a white substance she could not immediately identify. One of the bigger fragments looked something like the cast she had worn as a child, that time she'd broken her lathe. Lilla approached the table, gazing at the knives in puzzled concentration. Then she heard the sound. At first she thought it was thunder, but then came the creaking from overhead, and she knew. Somebody had come into the house. Somebody was tiptoeing along the hall. Was it Sam? Had he come to find her? But then why didn't he call her name? And why did he close the cellar door? The cellar door had closed just now. She could hear the sharp click of the lock and the footsteps moving away, back along the hall. The intruder must be going upstairs to the second floor. She was locked in the cellar, and there was no way out. No way out. Nowhere to hide. The whole basement was visible to anyone descending the cellar stairs. And somebody would be coming down those stairs soon. She knew it now. If she could only keep herself concealed for a moment, then whoever came after her would have to descend all the way into the basement, and she'd have a chance to run for the stairs then. The best place would be under the stairway itself. If she could cover up with some old papers or some rags. Then Lilla saw the blanket pinned to the far wall. It was a big Indian blanket, ragged and old. She tugged at it, and the rotted cloth ripped free of the nails which held it in place. It came off the wall, off the door. The door. The blanket had concealed it completely, but there must be another room here, probably an old-fashioned fruit cellar. That would be the ideal place to hide and wait. And she wouldn't have to wait much longer, because now she could hear the faint, faraway footsteps coming down the hall again, moving along into the kitchen. Lilla opened the door of the fruit cellar. It was then that she screamed. She screamed when she saw the old woman lying there, the gaunt, gray-haired old woman whose brown, wrinkled face grinned up at her in an obscene greeting. "Mrs. Bates," Lilla gasped. "Yes." But the voice wasn't coming from those sunken, leathery jaws. It came from behind her, from the top of the cellar stairs, where the figure stood. Lilla turned to stare at the fat, shapeless figure, half concealed by the tight dress, which had been pulled down incongruously to cover the garments beneath. She stared up at the shrouding shawl, and at the white, painted, simpering face beneath it. She stared at the garishly reddened lips, watched them part in a convulsive grimace. "I am Norma Bates," said the high, shrill voice. And then there was the hand coming out, the hand that held the knife, and the feet were mincing down the stairs, and other feet were running. And Lilla screamed again as Sam came down the stairs and the knife came up, quick as death. Sam grasped and twisted the hand that held it, twisted it from behind until the knife clattered to the floor. Lilla closed her mouth, but the scream continued. It was the insane scream of a hysterical woman, and it came from the throat of Norman Bates. Chapter 16, and the penultimate chapter of the book. It took almost a week to reclaim the cars and the bodies from the swamp. The country highway crew had to come in with a dredger and hoist, but in the end the job was done. They found the money too, right there in the glove compartment. Funny thing, it didn't even have a speck of mud on it. Not a speck. Somewhere along about the time they finished with the swamp, the men who knocked over the bank at Fulton were captured down in Oklahoma, but the story rated less than half a column in the Fairvale Weekly Herald. Almost the entire front page was given over to the Bates case. AP and UP AP and UP picked it up right away, and there was quite a bit about it on television. Some of the write-ups compared it to the Dean affair up north a few years back. They worked up a sweat over the House of Horrors and tried their damnedest to make out that Norman Bates had been murdering motel visitors for years. They called for a complete investigation of every missing person case in the entire area for the past 2 decades, and urged that the entire swamp be drained to see if it would yield more bodies. Before we continue, I believe I probably said this before I read the book, but just in case I didn't, the paragraph that I just read is making a reference because this book right here, this book, this book was based on the cannibal serial killer Ed Gein. So that's a way to make a reference to the guy that quote unquote inspired this book to be made. And I say inspired loosely here for obvious reasons. But then, of course, the newspaper writers didn't have to foot the bill for such a project. Sheriff Chambers gave out a number of interviews, several of which were actually printed in full, 2 of them with photographs. He promised a full investigation of all aspects of the case. The local district attorney called for a speedy trial. Primary election was coming in October. It did nothing to directly contradict the written and oral rumors which were circulating in which Norman Bates was portrayed as guilty of cannibalism, Satanism, incest, and necrophilia. We're not going to discuss any of what those are. So, so if you're going to look it up, do so at your own risk. I'm not going to say what it is, what any of those are. Actually, of course, he had never even talked to Bates, who was now temporarily confined for observation at the state hospital. Neither had the rumor mongers, but that didn't stop them. Long before the week was out, it was beginning to appear that virtually the entire population of Fairvale, and not to say nothing of the entire county area south of there, had been personally and immediately acquainted with Norman Bates. Some of them had gone to school with him when he was a boy, and even then they had all, quote, noticed something funny about the way he acted. Quite a few had, quote, seen him around that motel of his, and they too attested to the fact that they'd always, quote, suspected him. There were those who remembered his mother and Joe Considine, and they tried to establish how they, quote, knew something was wrong when those two were supposed to have committed suicide that way. But of course, the gruesome tidbits of 20 years ago seemed stale indeed as compared to more recent revelations. The motel, of course, was closed, which seemed a pity in a way, because there was no end to the number of morbid curiosity lovers who sought it out. Quite conceivably, a goodly percentage would have been eager to rent rooms, and a slight raise with compassion for the loss of the towels, which undoubtedly would have been filched as souvenirs of the gala occasion. But State Highway Patrol troopers guarded the motel and the property behind it. Even Bob Summerfield was able to report a noticeable increase in business at the hardware store. Everybody wanted to talk to Sam, naturally, but he spent part of the following week in Fort Worth with Lilla, then took a run up to the state hospital where three psychiatrists were examining Norman Bates. It wasn't until almost 10 days later, however, that he was finally able to get a definite statement from Dr. Nicholas Steiner, who was officially in charge of the medical observations. Sam reported the results of his interview to Lila at the hotel when she came in from Fort Worth the following weekend. He was noticeably reticent at first, but she insisted on the full details. We'll probably never know everything that happened, Sam told her. And as for the reasons, Dr. Steiner told me himself that it was mostly a matter of making an educated guess. They kept they kept Bates under heavy sedation at first, and even after he came out of it, nobody could get him to really talk very much. Steiner says he got closer to Bates than anyone else, but in the last few days he appears to be in a very confused state. A lot of the things he said about fugue and cathexis and trauma are way over my head. But as near as he could make out, this all started way back in Bates' childhood, long before his mother's death. He and his mother were very close, of course, and apparently dominated him. Whether there was even anything more to their relationship, Dr. Steiner doesn't know. But he does suspect that Norman was a secret transvestite long before Mrs. Bates died. You know what a transvestite is, don't you? Lilla nodded. A person who dresses in the clothing of the opposite sex, isn't that it? Well, the way Steiner explained it, there's a lot more to it than that. Transvestites aren't necessarily homosexual, but they identify themselves strongly with members of the other sex. In a way, Norman wanted to be like his mother, and in a way, he wanted his mother to become a part of himself. Sam lit a cigarette. I'm going to skip the data about his school years and his rejection by the army, but it was after that, when he was around 19, that his mother must have decided Norman wasn't even going out into the world on his own. Maybe she deliberately prevented him from growing up. We'll never actually know just how much he was responsible for what he became. It was probably then that he began to develop his interest in occultism, things like that. And it was then that this Joe Considine came into the picture. Steiner couldn't get Norman to say very much about Joe Considine. Even today, more than 20 years later, his hatred is so great you can't talk about the man without flying into a rage. But Steiner talked to the sheriff and dug up all the old newspaper stories, and he has a pretty fair idea of what really happened. Considine was a man in his early 40s when he met Mrs. Bates when she was 39. I guess she wasn't much to look at on the skinny side and prematurely gray, but ever since her husband had run off and left her, she had owned quite a lot of farm property he'd put in her own he'd put in her own name. It had brought in a good income during all those years, and even though she paid out a fair amount to the couple who worked it for her, she was well off. Considine began to court her. It wasn't too easy. I doubt that Mrs. Bates hated men ever since her husband deserted her and the baby, and this is one of the reasons why she treated Norman the way she did, according to Dr. Steiner. But I was telling you about Considine. He finally got her to come around and agree to a marriage. He'd brought up this idea of selling the farm and using the money to build a motel. The old highway ran right alongside the place in those days, and there was a lot of business to be had. Apparently, Norman had no objection to the motel idea. The plan went through without a hitch, and for the first 3 months, he and his mother ran the new place together. It was then and only then that his mother told him that she and Considine were going to be married. And that set him off? Willa asked. Sam ground out a cigarette in the ashtray. It was a good excuse for him to turn away as he answered. Not exactly, according to what Dr. Steiner found out. It seems the announcement was made under rather embarrassing circumstances after Norman had walked in on his mother and Constantine together in the upstairs bedroom. Whether the full effect of the shock was experienced immediately or whether it took quite a while for the reaction to set in, we don't know. But we do know what happened as a result. Norman poisoned his mother and Constantine with, with strychnine. He used some kind of rat poison, served it to them with their coffee. At best, he waited until they had some sort of private celebration together. Anyway, there was a big dinner on the table, and the coffee was laced with brandy. It must have helped to kill the taste. Horrible! Lila shuddered. From all I hear, it was. The way I understand it, strychnine poisoning brings on convulsions, but not unconsciousness. The victims usually die from asphyxiation when the chest muscles stiffen. Norman must have watched it all, and it was too much to bear. It was when he was writing the suicide note that Dr. Steiner thinks it happened. He had planned the note, of course, and knew how to imitate his mother's handwriting perfectly. He'd even figured out a reason, something about a pregnancy, and Considine being unable to marry because he had a wife and family living out on the west coast, where he'd lived under another name. Dr. Steiner says the wording of the note itself would be enough to tip off anyone that something was wrong. But nobody noticed any more than they noticed what really happened to Norman after he finished the note and phoned the sheriff to come out. They knew at the time that he was hysterical from shock and excitement. What they didn't know is that while writing the note, he'd changed. Apparently now that it was all over, he couldn't stand the loss of his mother. He wanted her back. As he wrote the note in her handwriting, addressed to himself, he literally changed his mind, and Norman, or part of him, became his mother. Dr. Steiner says these cases are more frequent than you'd think, particularly when the personality is already unstable, as Norman's was, and the brief set him off. His reaction was so severe, nobody ever thought to question the suicide pact. Both Considine and his mother were in their graves long before Norman was discharged from the hospital. And that's when he dug her up? Lila frowned. Apparently he did so, within a few months at most. He had this taxidermy hobby, and knew what he'd have to do. But I don't understand. If he thought he was his mother, then it isn't quite that simple. According to Steiner, Bates is now a multiple personality with at least three facets. There was Norman, the little boy who needed his mother and hated anything or anyone who came between him and her. Then Norma, the mother, who could not be allowed to die. The third aspect might be called Normal, the adult Norman Bates, who had to go through the daily routine of living and conceal the existence of the other personalities from the world. Of course, the three weren't entirely distinct entities, and each contained elements of the other. Dr. Steiner called it an unholy trinity. But the adult Norman Bates kept control well enough so that he was discharged from the hospital. He went back to run the motel, and it was then that he felt the strain. What weighed on him most as an adult personality was the guilty knowledge of his mother's death. Preserving her room was not enough. He wanted to preserve her too. Preserve her physically, so that the illusion of her living presence would suppress the guilt feelings. So he brought her back and actually brought her back from the grave and gave her a new life. He put her to bed at night, dressed her, and took her down into the house by day. Naturally, he concealed all this from outsiders, and he did it well. Arbogast must have seen the figure placed in the upstairs window, but there's no proof that anyone else did in all those years. Then the horror wasn't in the house, Willa murmured. It was in his head. Steiner says the relationship was like that of a ventriloquist and his dummy. Mother and little Norman must have carried on regular conversations, and the adult Norman Bates probably rationalized the situation. He was able to pretend sanity, but who knows how much he really knew. He was interested in occultism and metaphysics. He probably believed in spiritualism every bit as much as he believed in the preservation powers of taxidermy. Besides, he couldn't reject or destroy these other parts of his personality without rejecting and destroying himself. He was leading three lives at once. And the point is, he was getting away with it until Sam hesitated, but Lila finished the sentence for him. Until Mary came along. And also, alright, so let me fix that. And before I do fix that, I need to I need to put my TV on mute, so no music gets played. And the point is, he was getting away with it until Sam hesitated, but Lila finished the sentence for him. Until Mary came along, and something happened, and he killed her. Mother killed her. Sam said, Sam said, Norma killed your sister. There's no way of finding out the actual situation, but Dr. Steiner is sure that whenever a crisis arose, Norma became the dominant personality. Bates would start drinking, then black out while she took over. During the blackout, of course, he'd dressed up in her clothing. Afterward, he'd hide her image away, because in his mind, she was the real murderer and had to be protected. Then Steiner is quite sure he's insane? Psychotic, that's the word he used. Yes, I'm afraid so. He's going to recommend that Bates be placed in the state hospital, probably for life. Then there won't be any trial? That's what I came here to tell you. No, there won't be any trial. Sam sighed heavily. I'm sorry. I suppose the way you feel. I'm glad, Lula said slowly. It's better this way. Funny how differently things work out in real life. None of us really suspected the truth. We just blundered along until we did the right things for the wrong reasons. And right now I can't even hate Bates for what he did. He must have suffered more than any of us. In a way I can almost understand. We're all not quite as sane as we pretend to be. Sam rose and she walked him to the door. Anyway, it's over and I'm going to try to forget it. Just forget everything that happened. Everything? Sam murmured. He didn't look at her. And that was the end of it. Or almost the end. Chapter 17 in the final chapter of the book. The real end came quietly. It came in the small barred room where she where the voices had muttered and mingled for so long a time. The man's voice, the woman's voice, the child's. The voices had exploded when triggered into fission, but now, almost miraculously, a fusion took place, so that there was only one voice, and that was right, because there was only one person in the room. There always had been one person, and only one. She knew it now. She knew it, and she was glad. It was so much better to be this way, to be fully and completely aware of oneself as one really was, to be seemingly strong, to be serenely strong, serenely confident, serenely secure. She could look back upon the past as though it were all a bad dream, and that's just what it had been. A bad dream, peopled with illusions. There had been a bad boy in the bad dream. A bad boy who had killed her lover and tried to poison her. Somewhere in the dream was the strangling and the wheezing and the clawing at the throat and the faces that turned blue. Somewhere in the dream was the graveyard at night and the dipping and the panting and the splintering of the coffin lid. And then the moment of discovery. The moment of staring at what lay within. But what lay within wasn't really dead. Not anymore. The bad boy was dead. Instead, and that was as it should be. There had been a bad man in the bad dream, too, and he was also a murderer. He had peeped through the wall, and he drank, and he read filthy books, and believed in all sorts of crazy nonsense. But worst of all, he was responsible for the deaths of two innocent people, a young girl with beautiful breasts, and a man who wore a gray Stetson hat. She knew all about it, of course, and that's why she could remember the details, because she had been there at the time, watching. But all she did was watch. The bad man had really committed the murders, and then he tried to blame it on her. Mother killed them. That's what he said, but it was a lie. How could she kill them when she was only watching? But she couldn't even move because she had to pretend to be a stuffed figure, a harmless stuffed figure that couldn't hurt or be hurt, but merely exists forever. She knew that nobody would believe the bad man, and he was dead now too. The bad man and the bad boy were both dead, or else they were just part of the dream, and the dream had gone away for good. She was the only one left, and she was real. To be the only one, and to know that you are real, that's sanity, isn't it? But just to be on the safe side, maybe it was best to keep pretending that one was a stuffed figure. Not to move, never to move, just to sit here in the tiny room, forever and ever. If she sat there without moving, they wouldn't punish her. If she sat there without moving, they'd know that she was sane, sane, sane. She sat there for quite a long time, and then a fly came buzzing through the bars. It alighted on her hand. If she wanted to, she could reach out and swat the fly. But she didn't swat it. She didn't swat it, and she hoped they were watching, because that proved what sort of a person she really was. Why, she wouldn't even harm a fly. About the author. That's a hell of a pause, isn't it? About the author. Robert Bloch, who was born 1917, died 1994, was a horror, suspense, and science fiction writer and screenwriter, best known for the novel Psycho. Although he wrote more than 220 stories collected in over 2 dozen collections, 2 dozen novels, screenplays for a dozen movies, and 3 Star Trek episodes, his many awards include the Nebula, Hugo, and World Fantasy Awards, including Lifetime Achievement, and 5 Bram Stoker Awards. His autobiography, Once Around the Block, was his last major work. So, let's talk about this book. Remember what I basically said earlier, pretty much what I would say about the book. There are a number of differences between the book and the movie, and I know this because I watched the book, or I watched the movie while reading the book, so I kind of knew what the ending was going to be like, but I still wanted to read the book just to see what kind of differences there were, and there are a few amount of differences in this book. And, truthfully, I would say if you are a fan of horror, or like a mystery, suspense, horror kind of thing, this would be your book. I absolutely enjoyed reading this book because of how it played with everybody. It just like the movie, how it just plays with you. You don't know what's gonna happen. Even with the trailer of the movie that was based on the book, even Alfred Hitchcock himself would do it in such a way where he would talk a little bit about bits and pieces of the story, but he wouldn't go into the full necessary details of the story. Which, in a way, with the way the marketing of the movie was, because with that trailer, it basically was, if you want to know what happened, you have to buy a ticket to see it. Otherwise, you're not gonna. Otherwise, you are gonna be missing out on what happened, when, where, and how something happened. You'll just know little bits and pieces that Alfred Hitchcock told you. So yeah, that was this book in a nut. That was that trailer in a nutshell. I would recommend this book to anybody that likes horror or mystery suspense kind of stuff. I would recommend it with this book very much. Um, but if I had to say, um, excuse me, but uh, if I had to say the rating for this book, it's going to be tricky because for me personally, the book was not as well. While it was R-rated in some areas and more PG-13 than others, I'm gonna have to think about it. I would have to think about what to give this book. But in the meantime, we must say goodbye to Psycho. And I know I said this already, but I'm going to do it anyway just in case nobody read, in case people did not read the community post. But like I said, we are about to say goodbye to Psycho, goodbye to one classic, and say hello to another. As The Hobbit will be taking Psycho's place as the book I read alongside the book that I have to finish still, Night Shift. So for some time, it will be these 2 books that I will be reading. But to make it fair, since I finished Psycho, I will be reading Night Shift on the next reading stream and then The Hobbit after that. In any case, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is Forrest Walpole, signing off.